Hi, my name's Dave Gormley with Andrews, Bungar, Gormley and Claggett. I've been doing bankruptcies for over 20 years. No one ever wants to come see me. No one wants to file a bankruptcy unless they've tried everything else possible that they could do to get rid of their debts without having to file for bankruptcy. But at some point, people have to cut their losses and realize that the only way to get rid of their debts in any type of reasonable time or even ever is to look at their bankruptcy options. That could be a Chapter 7 where you're getting your debts wiped out, or a Chapter 13 where you're paying back at least some of your debts over a 3 to 5 year period. But at some point, you've got to face up to the fact that all those other options aren't going to help, and all they're going to do is delay the inevitable. In fact, that's something that almost every client ends up expressing to me at some point in the bankruptcy process, is that they wish they had come and seen me a year ago, or at least they'd come to see me before they tried that one last thing that really didn't have any hope of solving their problems. One of the most common ones that I see is people who go to these debt consolidation companies or these debt settlement companies that you'll see on TV. And people will be in these plans with these companies and they're sending them payments every month. But none of that money is going to the creditors. In fact, the first thing that most of those companies will do is collect their own fee. After their fee's paid, they're trying to get a lump sum of money, and they're going to go to creditors one by one and see whether they'll do a lump sum payment for less than what's owed and accept that as payment in full. Well, sometimes those plans probably work, but I don't see it very often. I suppose I have a bad sample size. If it did work, the person wouldn't come see me, but all too often, somebody comes to see me and they've got lawsuit papers in their hands. One of the creditors got tired of waiting and they filed suit. Now the person's facing a garnishment or freezing of their bank accounts. The other thing is I suppose even when those plans work, I worry about what those people do at tax time. When a creditor accepts payment of less than what is owed, that forgiven debt, the amount that they agree not to come after, has to be reported to the IRS. And that 1099, you've got to include that on your taxes as income, and you can go from having a credit card problem to having a tax problem. So I always worry about how often when people think they've settled everything and they're moving on with their lives, and the next year when they go to do their taxes, it comes back to bite them. One of the other ones that I'll see a lot of times that kind of results in some of the same problems is someone who makes a 401k withdrawal or does a TSP loan. In particular on those 401k withdrawals, when you're taking money out of a retirement plan, you're going to have to report that the next year as income. And on top of that income, there's going to be a penalty in most circumstances for an early withdrawal. I don't know how they figure out how much they tell you you should withhold when you do that type of withdrawal. But inevitably, when I'm doing a bankruptcy petition for someone, if I see that they've got a large tax bill, I'll look down and I'll notice that the reason for it is because they had a 401k withdrawal, and all of a sudden they've gone to a tax problem. The other thing I often see is people do that withdrawal, and unless they've got enough money in there to cover the taxes and pay their creditors in full, they're going to end up in the situation where they've made a big withdrawal, they're going to end up with a tax problem, and all they're doing is getting caught up on their payments. Their payments behind, or maybe they're making minimum payments for a few months, but inevitably they fall behind again, and then they're coming to see me and they've lost those retirement savings. And generally speaking, if they had done a bankruptcy first without having done that withdrawal, they would have been able to keep that retirement money. The other thing I worry about in that circumstance is you've made this big 401k withdrawal, and then all of a sudden when you go to retire years later, are you going to have lost that income and you're going to be falling behind on your bills 20 years from now when you've retired, or 10 years from now? Do you really have enough time to recoup all that money that you withdrawn to have money to live off when you do go to retire? The other thing people will do that also results in a tax problem is they adjust their withholdings. They'll raise the exemptions they're claiming and they'll have a lot more money in their paycheck. And for a few months or maybe even a year, they've kept up on their monthly minimum payments on the credit cards, but that little bit of extra money in the paycheck isn't enough to help them really pay down their debts. So again, all they've done is delayed the inevitable, and they're really not putting a dent in their debts. And then when they go to do their taxes, instead of getting a refund they've owed, because they don't have enough money withheld from their paycheck to cover those income taxes. The other thing people will do sometimes is they've got a car. Maybe it's a lemon, maybe the payment was too big, and they think, well, if I can just get rid of that car, and maybe we're going to make do with one car instead of two cars, and we'll voluntarily surrender that car back to the lender. Well, again, unless that lender has agreed to accept that as payment in full, they're going to treat that just like a repossession. They're going to take the car that you turned into them, they're going to auction it off, and if there's not enough money from that auction to cover what you owe, they're going to come back after you for that deficiency. Then you end up with the situation where you don't have the car, you didn't have enough money left over at the end of the month without that car payment to pay all your bills off, and you're back to filing for bankruptcy, and you are in a much tougher situation because you don't have the transportation and you're juggling things a lot more. The other thing is even if that does work and the lender agrees to accept the turner in of the car as payment in full, they're going to report some phantom income to the IRS for the amount of debt they've forgiven. The other one I see is people get the big tax refund. And typically the way I find out about this is somebody comes to me, they did their taxes several months ago, they got a big refund, and I have to ask them what happened with that refund to make sure they haven't paid off debts to friends or family members. Usually that's not the case. All they've done is used it to get caught up on payments where they're behind on their credit cards, and then make a few months of payments on those monthly minimum payments, and then when that money's gone, they've got to come see me to file for bankruptcy anyways. And I suppose that's not really necessarily the worst of all things, and maybe it's a little self-serving, but I wish they'd come to see me when they got that refund. We might have had them keep some of it, and of course they would have been able to pay me a lot quicker, and after that money's gone, they've got to wait a couple months before they can get me paid in full and we can get their case filed. When we file a bankruptcy, there's certain assets you can protect or exempt, and you've got some savings that you're allowed to keep. And if you've got retirement savings, that's one of the big exemptions where, in most circumstances, when you file for bankruptcy, those retirement savings are protected. So that withdrawal one is from your retirement is the one that hurts the most for me, because I look at the fact that this is going to come back to haunt them later in life, and they would have had that money if they hadn't done that. So these are things that I see all too often people try. And in most circumstances, if you look at it kind of cold, hard facts, math-wise, all it was going to do was get you caught up on your payments or help you make your monthly minimum payments. It really wasn't going to make your problems go away. And I hate to see people drag things out when we could have done the case a year ago and they would have been bouncing back and reestablishing credit now, as opposed to now they don't have any more savings, they've lost some of their retirement money, or they've lost a vehicle, and now they're going to have a tax problem, and we still have to file that bankruptcy, and it's going to be another year or two before they bounce back because of the time they waited trying these other things that were really hurting them. If you're looking at these options, come back, sit down with me, and we're going to look over the situation, explain your bankruptcy options, and help you compare your plan to a bankruptcy plan or a bankruptcy petition, and figure out which one of those is best and whether the plan that you're going to try, these things could work for you, but we got to look at it kind of from a cold, analytical, mathematical, practical way and figure out whether there's at least some hope of, if you're going to do one of these things, that it really could solve all your problems. We're happy to do a free consult, look over all your finances, and help you decide what's the best way to bounce back from the bad financial problems that you're dealing with. Thanks for listening.